We were just making sure there was adequate closet space.
Good. This house is yours if you want it.
We'll take it.
Okay. It's just me.
You didn't see it, did you? You didn't see it, did you? You didn't see it.
See what?
She knew. She was drawing angels.
What are you doing here?
Somehow between 1 and 2:30, I traveled 400 miles. I've got no memory.
Past few months, people have been coming up to me and reporting strange things.
Weird lights, strange phone calls.
Hello?
Hello, John Clark.
Who is this?
What do you do when someone comes into your office and tells you they saw this in their backyard?
My wife saw some, drew pictures, just like this.
Who showed you this?
You know what that is?
One day I started hearing voices. The voices became messages.
It was right here. All I could see were these two red eyes.
I met him. You met him. He said, do not be afraid.
99 will die. 99 will die.
All 99 are believed dead.
You're reading my mind, are you? What's in my hand? Jack stuff.
Not a lot of people still talk about the Mothman prophecies. And I get why it didn't necessarily land and that people weren't lined up around the block about it. But as much as it doesn't necessarily maybe pay off with this idea of a monster, a creature, or whatever the hell the Mothman is, what I kind of dig about the movie is that it's a movie about the mystery itself, or about the idea of a mystery itself, and the idea of becoming obsessed with said mystery, and that for whatever reason, this entity, this problem, this supernatural being, the only way to deal with it is by not dealing with it. It's one of those things that the best thing you can do is just not pay any attention to it, which is of course why people obsess over it, right? It's kind of an interesting idea. And I think that the movie, like, it had a real uphill battle, in that Richard Gere can be really good, but a lot of the times he feels kind of flat for me. And he's pretty public about the fact he doesn't have much respect for the horror genre. For him, it's all about the metaphysical stuff. And whatever's going on inside his head is much more interesting than the non-expression that usually shows up on his face. But happily, Mark Pellington is an intensely visual director. And he has a really good gift. I remember saying this about The Shining, how like every scene in The Shining, it feels like someone just left or is about to enter the room. Like there's a lot of open space. There's just something uncomfortable about every scene. And it's one of these cumulative effect movies. There's not a lot of like trailer moments, I guess you'd call it, you know? It just kind of chips away at you slowly and slowly. And yes, it culminates in a big memorable bridge disaster, which is based on a true event, although it happened in the 60s. They modernized it for the story here.
Inspired by a true story as opposed to based on a true story.
But my takeaway is not the bridge sequence, although I think it's very well done. My takeaway is just this idea of this imponderable, frustrating mystery that can only drive you mad. The deeper you look, the more it breaks you. Strong performance from Laura Linney and a really strong performance from Will Patton and a lot of the supporting cast, because that's what you need. I remember thinking about in the Nouveau Godzilla they had David Strathairn as this military convoy leader who's like calling the shots in Godzilla. You need somebody who can really sell any piece of dialogue to play that role. So all of these people that are going to tell us these inexplicable, bizarre stories, who seem frankly embarrassed while they're telling the story, they have to be credible. And between Mark Pellington's direction and those stories, I got kind of sucked up into the romance of the mystery of the romance of the mystery, if that makes sense. It didn't make my list. It didn't make any one of my lists. But much like the other movie we're going to talk about, I think that the Mothman Prophecies was unfairly dismissed. And this is me shouting it out. give it another day in court. If you're a connoisseur of horror movies, I think that this has something to offer the patient viewer.
Yeah.
Am I wrong?
You're not wrong. I actually think Mark Pellington is actually a very, very good director, not only with the pacing of story, but even just how to shoot a movie. He knows how to use the frame very, very well, with both with things in background and foreground. And I find a good suspense director will master that and show that throughout his movie. Even like the opening shot where Richard Gere is startled by something and he moves back, but the phone kind of comes at you a little bit at the other side of the frame. Like, those are just well blocked shots. You can tell you're in the hand of a craftsman. And I love that whole sequence, if you will. Transition cuts where Gary loses his wife, and then it fades to him alone at the Pittsburgh University, and the color palette of gray that is washed over the film. Like, he knows how to use color and sound very quickly and very well to establish a mood. And yes, it's a movie that is hypnotic at how it chips at you. I also think he made the brilliant decision to jettison the whole alien aspect of the story. If you know much about the Mothman Prophecies, it's seen as like a UFO abduction story, and I think that was
like
smart to get rid of it.
Myth, it kind of sprongs out into all sorts of different directions. Yeah, some of the sightings were on a military base, and it was near where there was supposedly some experimentation done, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
There's also stories about Mothman being sighted all over the world, but they're mainly dealing with at least the basic arc of the 60s sighting cycle.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because it's almost like a social media event where it catches fire, and one person sees it and then starts talking about another one, another one. But this was long before the age of social media.
Yeah.
And that the tragedy on the bridge took place, and that put an end to the Mothman Prophecies. Is that because the Mothman was a real thing, or is that because a real tragedy arrived and they had something to talk about?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I can understand why some people get frustrated with the movie, because it, like I said, it does ask more questions than answers them.
Oh, and it's walking. It never runs.
Yeah.
yeah.
But I think another thing that it really taps well into is, once again, it's examining the culture of fear. What happens when a mysterious force comes upon a community, and how that community reacts to, and how they're terrified. Mm-hmm. To me, in a lot of ways, Will Patton and his wife are the movie. Like, Will Patton has had really good performances in mediocre films for
his career.
Yeah, for a long time now. I think of Jonathan Hensleigh's The Punisher, and what a frustrating movie that is, because as a sort of like young dumb action revenge movie, some of the acting in it is really, really top-notch good. And Will Patton is one of them. I mean, that death scene he has with John Travolta is really well acted by both of them in that scene, but it's really to do with how good Will Patton is. And here's another great performances in the Mothman, where you see this character's journey from where you meet him, where he's very much seduced into the culture of Mothman, and he's broken, and he goes all the way to the acceptance, and then to where he passes on. I think his arc is the most intriguing out of all of them in the entire movie. So I think Will Patton never gets enough love. But I do like how Pellington decided to approach, what happens when this mysterious force comes across this small community and how it affects everyone. And I think that's a terrifying idea. It was explored in Zodiac, and it's also explored in here. And that's why I think it's a really strong, solid horror thriller.
You've been very quiet, Jason.
I've been very quiet, because I just wanted to say something which makes it sound like I don't like this, and I do like the movie, but you announced like the ones of the 6th movie that we were going to do, sending a message, and then I went, oh geez, I need to find this. I was having trouble finding it, and then I was about to order it, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I just watched this like a month or two ago, and I had completely forgotten about it.
Oh wow.
So that's not high praise, unfortunately. And I was like, oh yeah, well no, I've seen this movie, and why is it that I was and I'd even kind of forgotten about Will Patton's part in it, and I kind of lean to Laura Linney giving the best performance in the movie, but Will Patton is very good, and I didn't have any notes about him, and now that it's something where it's like jogging my memory, and it's like, oh yeah, like I mean that whole section is great. It's freaky, particularly at the beginning when Richard Gere loses time. And, you know, like what is going on? And it's like, you keep knocking on my door every night. Well, we've been following him. He's never been to this town before, and like there's creepy stuff going on, which is great. An early problem I have with it, and maybe this is just, I don't know, too picky a criticism, was the Deborah Messing character. Which is pretty much no character at all. She's like this trophy wife he has.
She's more,
and then she dies, and she's a plot device.
She's a literary device, yeah.
Yeah, and she's a very, very good actor that deserved, I think, something
Richard
more in there.
Gere disagrees with you. In the interview I saw with him, he was just going on and on how she was like the launch pad for the movie. Like, her death and what she sees before the death is what starts the ball rolling. And I agree, it's certainly not what it feels like in the movie.
It's a plot device, though.
What it feels like to me, it's not one of those things like we talked about with The Descent, where the movie has to start with a tragedy for the main character, and then they have this supernatural adventure. For some reason, that's a thing that happens again and again and again. For me, it's about the hole in his life that is punched by the death of his wife. He fills with the Mothman. The hole in Will Patton's life
I can get behind
that is
that,
empty because he lost his job gets filled with the Mothman. And then you can say that's an interesting psychological component. But, and this is a creation of the movie, but I like it. Most of the actual eyewitnesses of the Mothman who speak words to them or looked him right in the eye are most of who are the casualties on the bridge. And so, like, that's where the idea is, like, he was predicting these people's fate. He's presenting himself to them was like he's this harbinger of death. And any vision of the Mothman is basically a shortcut vision to the death. And that if Richard Gere continued down this path, it would, maybe not on the bridge, maybe not that night, end up in a death. But instead what happens is it ends up with him saving a life. 57 people were supposed to die in that bridge collapse, according to Ingrid Cole, or the Mothman.
Ingrid Cole,
And once he saves Laura Linney from it, when they get the count, it's 56. And it's not a fucking coincidence. And you can feel the goose flesh go up on the characters. And the first time I saw it, it worked for me too.
Oh no, and that's where it ends, and I think it brilliantly ends.
I just am struggling with why, and then I feel like with these reviews, am I in a bad mood or something, or what's?
Well, you were watching
why? Because this is a movie that I should love. I mean, it has the psychological elements, the creepiness that I talked about with. It's my type of horror movie. Why can I not get excited about this film though? It kind of sits there for me, and I think the acting's there, but the Deborah Messing thing is a really minor criticism.
I respect the patience of the movie. I get
too.
Like that audience get bucked off because we don't really get our showy monster moment. We don't really get
which is wise. I mean, that's
physical showdown of any kind. It's just like it asks a bunch of questions and then it stops asking questions and it leaves you with it. And like I get that's a tough pill for a lot of people, but they put money in it. They got Richard Gere and Laura Linney, and like. They cared about this movie, and you don't see it. A lot of it is they're just too worried about that box office. No, we need something fucking crazy to happen right away. We need a reason for these people to stick around.
I mean, there's a few cliches in here. There's the character who says, "Don't look at this any further" or whatever, and of course he does. And
but at least it echoes the theme once again. Like I said,
we have the false.
The more you look at it, the more it fucks you up. And
he starts to look crazy to people when he thinks that politician is going to be blown up and
wrecking his life.
And
I mean, every like the longer he stays in Point Pleasant, the only thing that's working for him in Point Pleasant is his relationship with Laura Linney. Everything else is just making things worse and worse. Same thing with the Will Patton character. It just gets worse and worse and worse until he finally he's finished with it and he's done. So, but there's no real answers to it, and it asks a lot of its audience.
I will.
And I like that. I mean, I like all the stuff. It's just what am I? What am I missing? I think it's more about me than anything else.
Probably, yeah.
No, I don't. I mean, I
once again, there's
how could I forget about it?
Once again,
it's like the Mothman got a hold of me or something where I've lost time and I've watched this movie.
You had an encounter with the Men in Black.
The Men in Black don't want me to.
There's an ugly sense of nihilism that this
nihilism?
Nihilism. Excuse me, nihilism that this movie celebrates, because like just some of the concepts that it's advertising are pretty dark, and like good does not triumph over evil in this story.
No.
So,
the way for good to win is for good to walk away.
Yeah, and I think that's a pretty horrifying concept.
Yeah. And the idea that it showed up apparently around Chernobyl before the Chernobyl accident, and it didn't die, it wasn't defeated, it just went somewhere else.
Yeah.
All of that's kind of creepy, and it's not handled in a in spite of a few cliches, it doesn't feel like it's being handled in a Hollywood way at all.
Yeah,
no, really.
Do not feel spoon-fed. The closest, you're right, that it comes to is, I think it's Alan Bates who plays the character.
Yeah, that's right.
Who steadfastly refuses to cooperate until it was time for him to drop the exposition, and then he dropped the exposition and vanished from the movie. So yes, that, and yes, the main character having a tragedy in their life. I don't know what that thing is about, but it is
always
a thing.
And then they have to make things even worse for this person afterwards. Yeah.
Something terrible happens to them, and then they get this supernatural adventure.
But there's such an air of creepiness in the setup when he goes traveling and he's in this town, and I like a lot of that stuff, and I don't know why. As you said, it's well made, the bridge sequence, and it has to be in there. Like, that's the true story in here. But I was not... I don't know what they could have done to improve it, but I was just not excited about that as much as... It felt very big, but...
I like that it's an incredible story in the true sense of the word incredible. And I like how that's handled both by, like I said, the supporting actors, and especially Laura Linney, when she's just shaking her head and she just like how do I investigate this? I cannot fucking stand this. This is crazy. And you sympathize. You can't arrest the Mothman, but these people are gonna call you and say fucked up shit's happening, and
how can you help them?
And what can you do to help them? And as it turns out, the best thing to do is nothing. It's different, and again, it does not seem like another factory stamped out of the studio's horror movie. They were trying something. It was a big swing.
A lot of love went into this movie, and I think it's a well-made, supernatural X-Files.
The critics were split, and it did not do well financially, and I just think it deserves a second day in court.
There you go.
And I think I was watching it, and then watching this, and then I watched The Exorcism of Emily Rose around the same time, and so it's got two Laura Linney horror movies, and it was news to me what you said about her not really respecting the genre that much, and maybe there's more bells and whistles, I guess, in The Exorcism of Emily Rose.
And again, another quote true story.
Yeah, another quote true story, and that one stayed with me, and this one obviously slipped my mind. And
fair enough. But I know it seemed
it's
like
worth
a weird
watching,
choice, but I just wanted to have the conversation.
And it's kind of like with Frailty for me. You want more people
absolutely
acknowledging it, and it is worth seeing, and I think people should check it out and form their own opinions. And like a lot of the ones we're talking about, I want to like it more than I actually do.